Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our faculty colloquium. And today we have great pleasure to have with us Professor Tomasz Lipniacki from the Institute of Fundamental Technological Research of Polish Academy of Science. Welcome, Professor Lipniacki. He's our colleague from this faculty because he graduated from it, then obtained PhD in this institute he works in now, Institute of Fundamental Technological Research, Polish Academy of Science. And then after obtaining PhD, he was a visiting researcher in several American universities, Rice University, Los Alamos National Laboratory. And finally, he switched to this type of research he performs now, namely, he works with cell responses to stress. He's heading the Laboratory of Modeling in the same research institute, has a large group which does this. And needless to say, he is now a media man. You may find his name very often in all sorts of media. He is being interviewed, he lectures, fulfilling his duty to enlighten his fellow citizens in matters of COVID virus, which I hope he'll do to us as well. Professor Lipniacki, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. I think you have to make.
Yes, I will just remove my sharing and you do your share instead.
Okay.
Yeah, and full screen, please.
Just a second. Okay, can you see the full screen now?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, perfect. So the title is given. This will be in two parts. First, I will talk about estimation of basic reproduction number and of super spreaders in the epidemic. And then I will switch to tell you about super spreading variant of concern of 2020 that arises in England and is threatening all world now. This is a joint work with my former PhD student, Marek Kochańczyk, my current PhD student, Frederick Grabowski, and two guys from math department or around math department. Grzesiek is also studying at Warsaw Medical University and on MISMA. So the first part will be on super spreaders. I will start, super spreaders will be the explanation of the discrepancy we observed. And now I will start from estimation of the basic reproduction number. So I hope that after 1 year of pandemic, everybody knows what is the basic reproduction number, but just to define what we will be talking about, it is the expected number of secondary infections by a single primary case. So this is the number, how many people a single infected people infects in average. And this is the critical parameter that characterizes any outbreak of epidemics. Its actual value also matters because if R0 is high, then the fraction of people that needed to be vaccinated or needed to pass the disease and get resistance is larger. So if R0 is say 4, then 75% of people need to get vaccination or pass the disease to achieve herd immunity. Of course, the story is a bit more complicated because the population is structured and not everybody has the same number of contacts, but in average, this is why even after 1 year, the actual value of R0 is meaningful, and I will tell you that this value is changing now. Okay, so we estimated based on epidemic in spring in Europe, in the United States, and in China, that the R0 is in the range of from 4 to 11, while the early estimate in based on epidemic in China was much lower. So first I will tell you how we estimated it, and then I will discuss what I think caused this discrepancy. So this is the so-called Sayre model of epidemics, which we use to calculate R0 based on data. The model is quite common, and but still I think it is quite interesting. I mean, this is not something new. So we have the susceptible individuals that have no contact with infection. These individuals, they can get infected by infectious individuals, and when they get infected, they are so-called exposed. I don't like this term. They are rather infected, but they are not yet infectious. And now we have 6 states of being exposed or infected. This is just a trick because we want to properly model the time distribution of latent period. So latent period, it is relatively well known that this is of order of 5 days, and its distribution is close to Erlang 6. So this is convolution of 6 exponential distributions. So when we use 6 exposed states, we are getting proper distribution of latent period. One cannot do this trick. I can use the delay differential equation and assume that the delay is distributed according to this distribution. But for me, it is easier to work with ordinary differential equations, not the delay differential equation. So these 6 exposed states, they are only to model the distribution of latent period. The period in which the person is infected, but it is not yet infectious. Then we have infectious state. In infectious state, we can infect susceptibles, individuals, and then there is the rate, and we are moving to the removed compartment. Removed compartment are people that are no longer infecting for various reasons. They can no longer infecting because they are detected as infectious, and they put into self-quarantine. They can get very sick and spend time in bed, or then can die eventually. But what mostly contribute to the rate between infectious and removed is diagnosis. When somebody is diagnosed to be ill, or he feel ill, he is removed from the compartment. He is not longer infecting anybody. And there is a somewhat different variant in which the infectious state has 2 subcompartments, which corresponds to which means that we assume that the time in which person is infectious is Erlang 2 distributed. People really don't know which is better, so we consider it 2 variants. In one, we assume that in infectious state it is exponentially, the time in which person is in infectious state is exponentially distributed, and in other it is Erlang distributed. Okay, and of course behind this graph they are equations. I'm not going to go through all of them. They are sort of mass action equations. So S is susceptible state, so the number of people in susceptible state is decreasing because of the fact that they are getting infected. So there is a product of infectious people's time susceptible people divided by total number of people. So S over N, it is the fraction of susceptible people, and so on. I mean, I think that the graph well describes this system of equations. What is important is that until the number of susceptible people is close to N, so nearly everybody is susceptible, this system is linear and can be solved simply. Can be solved, and in such a case, the growth of infected people, infectious people, and excluded people grows exponentially. If it grows exponentially, it can be solved, and then there is a quite complicated formula which was derived 15 years ago by Weaver, and we derived it in a slightly different way independently just because we haven't known about the Weaver results. So this is the formula which connects the basic reproduction number with the doubling time. So the doubling time is the time in which the number of infected people doubles, or number of excluded individuals doubles. In the first stage of epidemic, all these numbers double in same time. So when we have this formula, depending on few coefficients, M and N are the numbers of these states. So this is 6, this is either 1 or 2. Gamma is the exclusion rate, and beta is the contact rate. So R0 is the simple function of these two rates. It is larger when the contact rate is higher, and it is smaller when the exclusion rate is higher. So when we are doing a lot of tests, then we can lower the reproduction number just by faster removing of infectious people. Okay, but to calculate R0 from the data, we need this expression R0 as a function of doubling time, because we can take doubling time from the epidemic data. And this is what we did. We fit a line in the logarithmic scale in 8 localities, and the idea is that we consider the epidemic 2 weeks after the number of cases, of excluded cases, I mean cases that had the test and are excluded, exceeds 100. So you can see that more or less it is very linear in all of these locations. So this is China. In fact, this is Hubei province, but the data is from China. The New York State, there is no sense to take whole United States because it is too heterogeneous. Italy, Spain, France, UK, Germany, and Switzerland. And these are doubling time. So the doubling time, the shortest is in New York. It is less than 2 days. So it means that the number of detected cases, it was doubling every 2 days for a period of 2 weeks. And everybody knows that these detected cases, they are only a fraction of all cases. And if they constituted all the time the same fraction, say 15% of all cases, then it is not a problem because the fraction will grow with the same rate. But if this fraction is changing, then it can perturb our estimation. So in addition to considering detected cases, we can consider deaths. Of course, with deaths, there are also problems, but in these locations, excluding China, I know nothing about China, but in these locations, the reporting of deaths was relatively correct. Maybe it was the worst in Spain. In Spain, the death excess, the reported COVID deaths constituted 60% of death excess. But in all other locations, Italy, France, UK, Switzerland, Germany, the death excess is comparable, is very close to the COVID assigned deaths. So we know that deaths were reported correctly, not like in Poland recently. And we obtained basically the same rate of growth, the same doubling time. So there are some differences. Yeah, you remember that in New York it was 187. There are some differences, but the numbers, I can switch it once again, are between 2 and 3. Yeah. So when we estimate, okay, and now we can take these straight lines. They corresponds to either death estimates if they are brownish, or if they are orange, they correspond to doubling time estimates based on cases and corresponds to different countries. We can get the curve from the model, this curve resulting from these equations connecting doubling time and R0 estimate and R0, and we can consider 2 models with 1 infectious state and with 2 infectious state because we are not sure. So we have 2 lines, and we can read that in these countries, using all realistic estimates, that the reproduction number is between 5 and 11, 4.7, 11.4. And here are the curves from the other models. So they will predict somewhat smaller values, but not as small, and I will come to this. So what is important is that in our model, this is the experimental data, and in their models, the generation time was very close. So the difference, it will not be caused by the generation time, but it will be caused by the estimation of this doubling time. What is generation time? This is important measure, and it will be important for the second part of the talk. This is time between a primary and secondary infection. So I get infected at some time, and then I'm infecting somebody else, and the average time between this, it is generation time. And this generation time is close to 1 week. So it is longer than than incubation time, because after incubation time we start infecting, and we are infecting for a while. So we should take the incubation time and add half of the infection time, and this way we are getting a generation interval. So this is 5.28 plus 1/2 of this infectious time, and this is how we are getting generation interval. Okay, so our estimate reproduction number 5 to 11 is in a stark contrast with nearly all early estimates. I can remember you that the that the World Health Organization, they had a mission to China in January 2020, and they estimated that it is in this range. Then they had the second mission, they increased this estimate, but anyway, it is much lower than our estimate. And it is important because seems that this low estimate, they caused that, in a sense, the epidemic was neglected in Europe and in US, because it is much easier to deal with epidemic that has the reproduction number of order 2 than to deal with epidemic that has reproduction number of order 8. If the epidemic has the reproduction number 2, it means that when we reduce contact rate by 2, then we reduce this reproduction number to 1. So reducing contacts by 2, infectious contact by decreasing mobility, by decreasing mass gathering, by wearing masks and so on, it's relatively easy to decrease it by 2. But it is very difficult to decrease it by 8, say. Okay, so what causes this discrepancy? So here are again the other estimates. You can see that most of them were very low, except that one. The discrepancy was caused by overestimation of doubling time. So it seems that this is like something which is sort of obvious when you look into epidemic curves, because you can simply see that how fast it is growing, but this was underestimated. And how it happened? It happened because, this is what we think at least, because when you consider the very early stage of the epidemic, it is likely that you will have no super spreading events, that it will be rather chain of transmission, that I infect you, you infect somebody else, and so on. And eventually there is a number of people that is not infecting anybody, and we know this, that say that the first epidemic case in US, it does not result in epidemic. The epidemic started after, so it may happen that even there is like a try of epidemic and it fails. So to understand this, we did simulations in which we did a bunch of stochastic simulations, taking exactly the same model as ODE model, but consider it as a Markov process. And we assume that there is a fraction, in this graph, there is a very small fraction of hyperspreaders. By hyperspreaders, I will just explain it, and that this fraction of hyperspreaders, it is 1% of all spreaders, but they are responsible of 2/3 of infection. So quite a lot, but seems that this is in agreement with data. So when we start epidemic, this is on the left-hand panel, the cumulative number of confirmed cases is growing, and then stochastically at some point appears first hyperspreader. And when the first hyperspreader appears, it infects so many people that subsequent hyperspreaders appear statistically frequently. So it changes the slope. So first we have relatively slow growth. This is the chain of infection. And then hyperspreaders appear here, and we have the fast growth. What is also important is that when you, because this stochastic Markov process is linear, the average over a huge number of trajectories corresponds to deterministic trajectory, is equal to the deterministic trajectory. But because this outlying trajectories, they have huge number of cumulative cases, there is a small number of trajectories that are above average and big number of trajectories below average. So the median trajectory is well below average. And when you are taking epidemic, say, in a single location, Hubei, China, you are taking single trajectory. So it is very likely that you take the trajectory that it is well below the deterministic trajectory. But finally, from some point, all trajectories behave like deterministic trajectories. But initially, most of trajectories are below the average. And now we can compare the two ways of estimating the doubling time. The estimate we use 14 days after 100 cases detected and get distribution. So rho is the number of super spreaders. So the biggest discrepancy is when this number of super spreaders is low, but it is all the time. So you can see that when we take the method in which we estimated by taking 2 weeks after 100 cases, we are getting a relatively narrow distribution, not very narrow. But when we are taking the estimate 30 days in first case, what people did early in China, you are getting very broad distribution. And while the average is the same, the median is the average is the dotted line. The median in our estimate is close to the average, while in the estimate 30 days after first case, it is much higher than average. And it is very likely that you estimate much higher number than the average, but finally the average rules. Okay, so finally, this is a comparison when we take these trajectories from China, Italy, and Spain, and you use our method of estimation of doubling time and the method 30 days since first case. So you can see that here you are getting much longer, in some cases, really much longer estimates than in our estimate. So the take-home message is that when you have the epidemic outbreak and you are taking the early trajectory, it is very likely that you will not have any super spreading events, because if there are few super spreaders, you have to infect the first super spreader. So it may happen that for months you will not infect anybody, that will have huge number of contacts and will have the physiological properties to infect so many people. So it is very likely that when you estimated R0 based on the early trajectory, you may heavily underestimate its value. So I think that it is important when we think about future epidemics and future estimates. I really think that the fact that it was underestimated in the very beginning, it resulted in some neglectment of epidemic in Europe and in US. Okay, so it was the end of part one. We finally, after a long battle with reviewers, we finally published it in Royal Society Open Science. Okay, and now is the second part, something which is a bit more actual. As possibly you have heard, in England there was rise of super spreading variant of concern, the variant that has higher reproduction number than existing variants. And I will
30 minutes approximately.
Okay, thank you. And I will start with some chronology, first showing you the cartoon of the virus. So the virus has its famous spikes, and there is a spike protein, and this protein is important because it provides contact with ACA2 receptor on the cell membrane. So first there is binding to this receptor, and after that there is a fusion with the membrane. So this binding is really crucial because this is anchorage of the virus to the membrane, and not surprisingly, this protein is targeted by our adaptive immune system, by antibodies that are produced to hinder this binding sites and to modify this to bind to this protein and to perturb its action. And also when it mutates, it may avoid our immune system, or it can be better adapted to human receptor ACA2. So in the just after the epidemic started in January, there was important mutation, D614G, which means that, okay, protein is a chain of amino acids. There are 20 different amino acids, which allows to label them with Latin letters, and D means aspartic acid. So this mutations means that the aspartic acid at the residuum 614, so this is a long chain of more than 1,000 amino acids, is replaced by glycine. I will not explain any further mutation, but this is just the convention. So here we write the amino acid that is replaced. Here it is the position, and here we write the amino acid that replaces this original amino acid. And you can see that this mutation, I don't know if it occurs once and then it vanishes and occurs twice. Anyway, it spread towards the fixation. So starting from summer, nearly all COVID genomes that exist in world, in patients, have this mutation. So this mutation was advantageous. The viruses having this mutation in spike protein replicate faster, or the people having this virus infect with higher efficiency. What is important, this mutation is changing the structure of whole spike protein, making it that it is sort of more open, and as I learned, it causes that it binds to the receptors with a higher affinity, but it is not in the binding domain, which is somewhere here. And then we can use the technique we will be applying to the end of the stalk and calculate the replicative advantage of this mutation. So what we are doing, we are plotting the ratio of genomes having these mutations to genomes without that mutations. And if these mutations have the advantage, this ratio should grow from 0 to infinity in the exponential way, so linearly in the logarithmic scale. So here, these first points, there were very few data here, so we are not trying to fit. And here there are more data, but you can see that the fraction of genomes without that mutation is less than 1%. So the denominator is very small. So in between, there is a relatively good linearity, and we can fit, and found that this ratio is growing 1.38 times per week. So each week it grows 0.138 times. So now we can, to make it a bit more rigorous, we can calculate the confidence interval of our estimate, and we are getting this result. This is just twice standard error of the slope. And also, here it is maybe not very important, but in the later cases it will be important. We can calculate, we can estimate this confidence interval, assuming that the numbers of DG genomes to non-DG genomes are drawn from binomial distribution from the total number of genomes, because not all found genomes are selected, only small fraction. So basically it is like binomial distribution. And then we are getting somewhat more narrow confidence interval, which is good because it tells us that our result is not by chance. Yeah, you can imagine that it can happen that we have 4 points perfectly in line. Yeah, but if these 4 points are quotients of relatively small number, it will be rather by chance. So in the case when we are finding that this confidence of this interval of confidence is more narrow than this one, we found that this result is not by chance. And this is the case in all plots I will be showing you. So finally, if we know that this ratio grows with rate 1.38 each week, we can calculate what is the ratio of reproduction numbers. Here there are no 0 reproduction numbers, but current reproduction number. So this ratio is given by this value to the power, which is the quotient of serial interval divided by 7 days, by a week. Yeah, because you can imagine that if serial interval was 3.5 days, then if the ratio would grow 4 times in a week, then it would grow 2 times in this serial interval, so the ratio of this reproduction number will be 2, not 4. So this is this correction, which in fact is very small. So so what we learn now is that now we have this mutant, and all other mutations, nearly all other mutations that happen are on this mutant, and this mutant had this replication advantage 1.36, something around, with respect to original virus. Now we can switch to England, and we consider so this pink is this digimutant, which was completely spread all over England, and green is the other mutation. It is mutation in this residue, and it was and started in summer. It started spreading in England, and it reached more than half of genomes. And then this new mutation arises. This new mutation, it does not arise on that mutant. It arises independently, and then it started spreading really very fast with respect to remaining variants and that A20EU1 mutation. So first, let us calculate what is the growth of this green variant. So the growth of green variant in this linear range is 1.23, which means that it was like faster than other mutants. And now we can come to the variant of concern. We prefer to compare it with this previous variant, not average over all variants, but this previous variants, because this previous variant was dominating in England. So this variant of concern, this is really sort of horrible mutation. Possibly it arises from the patient that was ill for 3 months and eventually died, but the virus has 3 months for mutating, and it acquires a huge number of mutations, including 9 mutations in spike protein. So there are 2 deletions, one is double deletion, and 7 substitutions. Yeah, okay. So now and this is like the main point of the second part. We estimated its advantage. Initially, we used only 4-week period because we think that here the intervention started. So it is sort of obvious that if you have a region when something wrong happens and people realize somewhere around 47 weeks that something wrong happened, they impose the restrictions, so they block spreading in this period. But it is questionable. So what we did, we did a fit in this short period, 43-47 week window, and we get that its replicative advantage is more than 2. Remember that the replicative advantage of this Digi variant was 0.38, and it became dominant in all world. Yeah, and this is more than 2. When we take this longer window, it is somewhat less than 2. We think that the true is between, so we propose to read this fits as it is in this range 1.85 to 2.17. Yeah, that this is somewhere here. Okay. What is now important is that, of course, this is not the end of mutations. Yeah, this variant keep mutating, and as of January 10, there were there were, this is number of genomes on the right-hand side, but there were more than 300 different mutations and more than 100 mutations found in 2 genomes. If the mutation is found in more than one genome, it means that it can survive, that it replicates. In England, 5% of genome is selected. So if you find it in 2 genomes, it means that it is like, I don't know, 50 cases. Yeah, so it means that it replicates rather. And this is the mutations in the whole genome. So you can see that in majority of substrains, they are from say 4 to 1 mutation. Yeah. So it continues mutating heavily, and it can acquire new features, and it can spread faster or slower. What is important is that it can acquire mutations that will make it resistant to our developed immune response. So the people can get repeated infections. And to see this, it is good to look into the structure. So the key domain which is responsible for which is a target of our adaptive immune response of the antibodies we produce is receptor binding domain. Receptor means AC2. And within this domain, there is a shorter receptor binding motif, and it is here. So people now expect that these mutations can cause immune escape. So can cause that the virus will escape to the immune response that was developed to the non-mutated virus. And it is not extremely difficult to check it. What you can do, you can take the mutated protein, you can take serum from patients that get infected and develop antibodies, and see how well these antibodies bind to this mutated protein. If they are not binding well with respect to non-mutated protein, you may see that this variant will avoid immune system if they not bind in this contact region, because this contact region is of key importance to anchor the virus to the cell membrane. Okay, so the South African strain, it has 3 mutations in the receptor binding domain, and these 2 mutations, they are considered as escape immune mutations. And in fact, it is spreading. The data is scarce. There are a few genomes collected in South Africa, but it is spreading fast in South Africa. What is, I'm close to finish. What is, so we calculate this advantage. What is frightening is that now first genome was collected in the early December, but after it was sent to GSAID, there is a new Manaus strain, Manaus in Amazon, that has nearly the same mutation, except the fact that at this residuum, the K is replaced by T, not by N, as in South Africa variant. And this VOC, this variant of concerned mutant in England, that it is spreading so fast, it got these 2 mutations independently. It means that there are substrains that have these mutations. They are not now very abundant, but they exist. So you can imagine that the situation is really a bit frightening because this variant is spreading very fast. So even if these mutations will play a role of passenger mutations, they will be spread because the basic variant is spreading fast, they can interfere with immune response. And the case of this variant in Manaus, it is sort of frightening because people used to think that in Manaus, more than half of people have been already infected. And now, basing on very small number of sequenced genomes, seems that this variant is dominating in Manaus. So it seems that it is dominating because of reinfections of people that get infected before. And if so, it can really endanger the current vaccines because current vaccines, in fact, rely on giving us the genome of the spike protein of the previous variant, that our body will use it to produce a protein, and we will develop the immune response to the previous variant. Yeah. So if we see that the reinfections of the mutant variant are possible, are more likely than with the existing variants, then it poses some threat that the vaccine will not work work well. It will be not as effective. So I am at the conclusion we found that this new English variant has about twofold replicative advantage over the existing variant that was dominating in England in November. The strain is already spread across the world. I mean, nearly all countries, more than 90% of countries that are reporting genomes to GSIDE data found that variant. So if there is no report, there is no variant. But if the country is reporting, then the variant exists. Okay, so I'm done. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much. And now this talk is open for questions and comments. Please, if you want to ask a question or comment, please write it in a chat.
But maybe you can just ask it. I'm not sure if I see the chat.
No, I shall control it. Don't worry.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to ask a question or comment, make a comment, mark it on a chat. And you can unmute your microphone meanwhile also. Here we have a question. We have actually, yes, there is a person who names himself Marek from ICM. Why we have not seen results for Poland, I guess, yet. There is an answer coming from, well, I don't have to read those. I read the question of Marek, so now there is Grzegorz who wants to answer. Please, Grzegorz, comment on it.
Actually, because we haven't seen results for Poland, because actually it's really simple, because we used we counted the VUI entities by looking at the genomes and looking if they have defining mutations in genome. And actually, okay, so never mind. The question was about something else, about R0. So first VUI was detected 4 days ago, but I guess that question wasn't about that. Sorry for that.
Okay, so if I may answer in simple words, I mean, to have a data, we need to sequence genome and send it to GSIDE or or deposit it in any other way. And Poland is not doing this. Simply as that.
Please, Marek of ICM, please formulate your question. I don't have to read it. Unmute your mic, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
So the first question actually related to
speak up a bit, or
the first question related to estimation of R0 for Poland. We've heard that we've seen results for several countries, and outside of within US, it was only New York or New York State. So I have two questions about it. One, is there an estimate for R0 for Poland? And then how different would the results for different states be? And can we attribute it to some external factors?
Okay, so it's a good question. So of course, there is like no reason that true R0 is the same for all regions. One could easily expect that, say, for Italy and Spain, where people eat outside, kiss more than in Norway or Finland, the true R0 will be higher. Yeah, if you have more contacts, the R0 depends on contact rate. Okay, and then it makes little sense to estimate R0 in countries like Poland or other states than New York and New Jersey, because in Poland, the sort of preventive lockdown was introduced in spring. So the RT rather than R0 in Poland was about 2 to 3, was much smaller than our estimates. And also in other US states, when the epidemic was starting in other states, except of New York and New Jersey, there were already some preventive measures. So there was ban on mass gathering. So the super spreading was much harder than initially in New York, Italy, Spain, or UK.
Okay, is it an answer? Then we have a very relevant question from Jadwiga and Michał Baj. Please ask it.
Michał Baj. If it is so important to know who can be or who is a super spreader, since the number of super spreaders is so dramatic, it can so dramatically influence the speed of spreading the infection. So the question is, what do you think? Can we predict somehow who can be a super spreader?
Who can be a super spreader to avoid them?
I think it would be very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. So I would expect that it rather is a person of good health that can, because to be super spreader, you need to have a high number of virons in your lungs to spread them, and you should feel, even having high number of virons in your lungs, relatively well to spread them. So I think that it should be like a relatively strong person, maybe with not perfect immune system. But what is really important, I think, is the circumstances. You can really imagine that when you are going to the football match yeah, and you really wanted to go to this enterprise, yeah, and even if you feel a little bit bad, you will go and you will play with your colleagues, you will go to the pub and so on. So I think that it really depends on circumstances. What people know for sure is that singing is the super spreading act. So people studied the chair meetings, and singing is a super spreading act. When you sing or speak loudly, you super spread if you get infected. So I think that what was like, we know that in Italy it was the football game, and I think that the football game is really perfect, because even if you feel a little bit bad, you will go for the game if you really want it, if this is your team playing.
All right, we have a flood of questions, so we have to somehow make them concise. Alexander Bogucki, please.
Thank you. So my question is about the paper, the effectiveness of population-wide rapid agent test-based screening in Slovakia, because it was the paper on medRxiv. And could you comment on that? Because the opinions are, let's say, divided. Is this mass spreading really reduces this exclusion rate, so changes this exclusion rate?
I don't know that preprint.
Because they tested whole country, as far as I understand, twice in short period.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as I know, I think I'm pretty sure about it. They tested countries for antibodies, which, regarding the control of the disease, makes almost no sense. So when you get infected, it is possible to detect the infection during the PCR test after, say, 3 or 4 days. You need to have a number of viruses, but you are having antibodies at the time when your immune system starts working and produces antibodies. And basically, it is the time you stop infecting anybody. So checking the antibodies, this is not a good method to prevent anything. You can learn how many people get infected in the last 3 months, because this is basically the time for which you keep that or other sort of antibodies. There are several sorts. Yeah, so it can tell you something, but for prevention, this method has no sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Janusz Hoist, please. Unmute your microphone, please.
We have already discussed it, that the replication ratio, this is not only the feature of the biological system, but it is socially dependent. It's dependent on number and kind of contacts. And these are influenced by our style of living and different tools that are, for example, existing that the country, the government is introducing. So one should not be surprised that this replication ratio is so different. I'm surprised that there's only the difference of the magnitude 2. I could imagine could be magnitude even 10.
Yeah, but seems that this is not 10. But on the other hand, the regions we have been comparing where there were no Scandinavian, no. So say I think that the rate of contacts in Italy and in England is sort of similar. The contacts are maybe a bit different, but in New York there are also intensive contacts. So I think that we rather took took regions or countries with intensive contacts. So maybe this explains why the differences were not so big. But for sure, for many months, the data regarding our mobility is published by Google. And what we can find is that in spring waves of epidemic, the reduction of contacts in Western European countries it was by 80 to 70%, and it was needed to stop the epidemic and made R below 1, while in Poland this reduction was around 50%. So in Poland, the relatively smaller reduction of contacts is needed to stop the epidemic than in Southern and Western European countries, because the basal number of contacts is lower than in Italy or in UK.
Okay, thank you. And then again, Marek of ICM, please.
Okay, I needed a comment on this super spreader, because in this kind of equations, they're sort of global for the whole region or population. And when we talk about the super spreader, who's an individual, how that could affect the dynamics of epidemic. I have a feeling that I have a better handle on super spreader as an event where many individuals participate and the high number of cases erupt from such an event. And it has been documented that the event of that nature occurred: funerals, singing events, ships where people use the same air conditioning system and similar, and also can relate to the language, because various languages have different frequency of certain vowels. Mm-hmm. That actually affects the emission of aerosols.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. I mean, in the model, we just assume that super spreader it is an individual, not event. The difference, maybe it is not as big, because if you in the model, you remain infectious for 3 days. So if you attend 1 or 2 super spreading events like a football game or singing once or twice, you can become a super spreader in that super spreading event. So of course, if you are super spreader, but you just decided to spend a week alone at the lake, you will not infect anybody, even if you are potentially perfect super spreader. Yeah? You will feel sick, you go home and stay home. Yeah. But in the model, the model is without any special resolution. We just run the stochastic model, assuming that there are 2 groups of people: normal spreaders and super spreaders. And if the fraction of super spreaders is very small, but they infect a big number of people, then this stochasticity effect is higher.
So perhaps I'll ask one more question.
Sure.
I haven't noticed it in this model. Let's assume there is a epidemic where the death rate ratio is very, very high, and actually your entire population decreases in substantial way. How would that affect the equations in the model?
Not really, because if you are in the model, if you are infectious, there is this gamma rate, which is removal. And you can be removed by the fact that you get sick and stay at home. You can be removed by the fact that you get tested and stay at home, or you can be removed by the fact that you die. Typically, you are removed before you die. Of course, you can go to the hospital and infect people in the hospital. Yeah, but basically, the removal is rather associated with detection. So it doesn't really matter that, I mean, we are not considering this removal group. There is no, we did it at the early stage of epidemic, so there was no recovery from this removal group. People can get healthy and then can get reinfected after, say, half a year, but we haven't considered this, considering only early stage of epidemic with exponential growth.
Okay, thank you so much. More comments, questions? Then I have a trivial one referring to the media statistics. All sorts of media give us official governmental statistics every day. Can you suggest one single number to rescale them to reality? We all suspect they are too low, but which number would you suggest?
Okay. I think that
not a function, but a number,
because it depends from country to country. I can tell you what I understand from the data in Poland. So in 2020, we had about 80,000 additional deaths in Poland with respect to average from 3 previous years. I think that in most cases, these additional deaths were associated with infections, not going into details whether this was a primary or secondary cause. Why I'm thinking so? Because in countries that do post-mortem tests, additional deaths are very close to COVID assigned deaths. So as well in Poland, as well in France, there is a disastrous situation in the medical system, but the difference is that they are doing post-mortem tests and we are not doing post-mortem tests for political reasons, as I learned. So I think that majority of this 80,000 additional deaths are COVID-associated deaths, possibly not all. The COVID deaths confirmed by tests in 2020, it was close to 30,000. So there is a substantial discrepancy. Mm-hmm. What one could expect that in the nearest months, there will be growing number of additional deaths not associated with infection just because of neglectment in medical system. Yeah, this sorry. These neglectments accumulate. Yeah, and so there will be cancer deaths, cardiac associated deaths, and so on. So the hardest data we have are the excess deaths.
Mm-hmm. So assuming that the work ethics of our government does not deteriorate with time, you may say the 2020 data is a good normalization information. So we should actually multiply official numbers by factor of 3.
Not really, because in October, we had to multiply official numbers by 5.
Oh,
In November by less than 3, and
okay.
in December by 2. So seems that our health system is not possible to report more than 500 deaths per day. Simply, the capacity of the system is too small to report more deaths. If there are more deaths, people simply are dying at home without having a test made. So we may not report more. So
all right, and then Alexander Bogucki, please, you have a question also.
We don't have, as far as I understand, we don't have data about mutations in Poland. So what's the situation, what's the spread of these mutations in Poland in big numbers, let's say single cases, because we don't have a system. And could you comment how expensive such building of a system is, or this is conscious decision of our government that we don't need such a system, or why is that?
I'm not sure. I don't think that sequencing, say, 100 genomes per month, it is a big deal as far as I know. I think that there is a problem of getting genomes for sequencing. So there are some administrative regulations needed. The same is with post-mortem tests, which is relatively easy. I mean, we don't need to know what is going on. We don't need to test everybody post-mortem. If 1/10 of people get post-mortem tests, we would know everything. So, but you may not do simply the regulations as are now. You may simply not do post-mortem tests in a statistical manner because there are no such regulations in law that will allow to do it.
Okay, now we have 2 more comments and we close the discussion at this level. It's Grzegorz Prejbisz and then Bogdan Lessing, and then everyone else. Well, okay, Marek joined once again, but now we say stop after those 3 comments, and you may continue contacting Professor Lipniacki privately. Please, Grzegorz.
I was just answering the question about the genome sequencing and using the one technology which is called nanopore and which was used to sequence some SARS-CoV-2 genomic data in Poland. It costs around 500,000 zlotys. So it isn't so expensive. I was just answering because okay. I knew the prices.
And then a comment from Bogdan Lessing, please.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay, just a second.
Yeah, we hear you.
Good to hear you.
Okay, good. No, it's obvious conclusion. I mean, if really the situation becomes critical because of new mutants, then I would suggest just to use really masks as good as possible. And the best masks are made of nanofibers. They actually prohibit transferring viruses in both directions. I mean, it's trivial fact. And actually they are, of course, more expensive than conventional ones, but you know, it's something which really we could really afford to buy something like that. There are also technologies with some mask containing heavy ions, so nanoparticles, and that also destroys partially proteins. So I think it's also a good solution.
Okay, but Marek of ICM gives us a cheaper recipe.
No, he says don't use Lycra, Okay, I agree with that.
Well, look, what I'm saying is not my own invention. I keep reading, various reports on that, and there were lots of reports on that in physics, various publications, and physicists made a number of studies with microphotography and showing the spread of spread of aerosols out of mouth in various conditions using various masks as well. And of course, there are cheap solutions like those, what I'm saying, filters. We all need masks, and we need to change them often. And some are reusable, some are not. So for reusable, that would be the cheapest possible solution, I suppose.
All right,
There is
thank you.
there are companies in Czech Republic. That's true, because actually in Czech Republic they were carrying out some European projects for producing nanofibers, and
right.
but
Okay.
of course these
Okay.
companies also have some representatives here in Poland.
All
right
right,
now.
we got the message. Thank you so much. We cut the discussion at this level. Thank you so very much, Tomasz, Professor Tomasz Lipniacki. It was so good to host you here in your
My pleasure.
mother faculty. Please come back often. We shall not forget you, but you should not forget us either. Thanks again, and thanks to all participants. Now we shall have our next colloquium in the next term, which starts in March. So sometime in March, please come back. We shall have a very good program next term too. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.